that support everybody with such diverse needs in such diverse geographic spaces with such different intentions, because every country had different intentions, different goals in terms of their socio-economic pursuits. They are all in different political cycles. Each one has gone through political elections at different times. So there might be times when we were to get to a state of approving something, but then shortly before the approval, there might have been a change in government, and you almost have to bring a new government from some country into the fold after you would have advanced significantly. So it wasn't an easy road. But the common vision, which was what made it easy, is that all countries in the region recognized that the way in which the energy systems were architectured, from whether you were oil producing Trinidad or net oil importing Jamaica, everyone recognized that the way in which we were architectured in terms of our energy systems had to change. The one common thread, more than above everything else, was the fact that all the countries are very inefficient in how they utilize energy. And that was the starting point. So the understanding, we said, okay, even if you are using your own domestic fossil fuel sources, your energy intensity, like Trinidad and Tobago as a case in point, was 44,000 BTU per US dollar of GDP. A global average was about, at that time, 10,000 BTU per US dollars of BTU. So you are 4.5 times above global average. There is therefore something that a center could do to help you to become more efficient and utilize the resource that you have, and a valuable resource to the rest of the world that you could sell in a way that is more efficient and would give you better value for money. And likewise, with those countries that were interested in renewable energy production, we were able to determine how we could best support and help them to do so. So fast forward to 2023, 5 years after the full establishment, because it took another 12 months before the ratification instruments would have happened for it to become a legal entity. So fast forward to 2023, and the CCRE has been fully functional and supporting countries. The purpose of the CCRE, the number one purpose, is to accelerate the transformation. The view is that some things would have happened organically anyway, because as technologies improve, as global climate action is driven, a lot of it externally, things would happen within the Caribbean. Governments have their own ambitions and would do things regardless. Private sector would make use of opportunities. But the view is that having an entity which have a dedicated, exclusive focus on how to quickly transform the sector in the most cost-effective way is something that could result in acceleration. And that is really where the CCRE focuses on how to accelerate. And the crux of how we have been working so far has been based on helping the countries to develop long-range plans as a starting point, long-range sector plans for the electricity sector and the energy sector. So integrated resource and resilience planning on the one hand, and integrated energy planning on the other hand. And then, of course, doing quite a bit of work in areas like offshore wind, hydrogen, and really getting to understand what a regional energy integration map with energy security and energy resilience at its center could look like. And the bottom line is that as a vision, the collective vision for CARICOM, the view is that with resilience as the central fulcrum, resilience as the central fulcrum, because we recognize that the Caribbean is the most vulnerable region to the anticipated impacts of climate change, to the projected impacts of climate change. So we therefore have to build everything around resilience. And so the energy system, which starts from the source and goes all the way to the services that it supports, has to be firstly built out in a way that is sufficiently resilient, and so that it also imparts resilience to the other sectors, so that it's coupled with the rest of the economy and provides resilience. And I'll end on one last point, which is the point that a critical piece, therefore, is that we see the energy sector as a way in which not just the social good and the resilience good of the countries can be supported, but we see it as a way in which the economic systems of the countries can be diversified from the climate-sensitive sectors that we now depend on. You see, many countries are dependent on tourism and agriculture, which are very climate-sensitive. And we think that in utilizing the renewable resources that we have to create low-carbon industries that are much more resilient to the impacts of climate change and externalities such as wars and pandemics and so on, it will put the Caribbean on a resilient pathway that would allow the countries to thrive better and to therefore be able to afford the costs of adaptation in a much more sustainable way. Thanks.
Thank you. So, Dr. Gardner, you mentioned that planning is integral to the way forward for the Caribbean. And you've mentioned that creeping into those plans, hydrogen factors into how we move forward as a region in building out our renewable energy supply. Mr. Madrigal, from IDB's perspective, a recent publication that you would have undertaken in December 2022 highlights that green hydrogen is emerging as one of the most versatile climate change mitigation tools, since it possesses a unique potential to decarbonize hard-to-abate sectors such as freight transport, energy-intensive initiatives, and power systems highly dominated by fossil fuels. So from IDB's perspective, understanding the goals of the region and what the countries themselves have determined that they want to accomplish from the energy perspective, how specifically is IDB working with our countries to help them achieve these ambitions? And if you can, please share some concrete examples for us of the work that IDB is undertaking.
Thank you very much, Cheryl, for the question. And as Devon said, we need to advance on bringing renewables to the Caribbean, sector plans, all the regulations and the financing to deploy renewables. And that will take us to decarbonize and making the Caribbean electricity system more resilient. Now, you cannot decarbonize everything with just electricity. We need hydrogen, and hydrogen is going to produce renewables at very cost competitive numbers compared to other parts of the world. Just to give you an example, and it's part of the study that Cheryl mentioned, we have estimated that hydrogen converted to ammonia in Latin America is very competitive in Europe. For example, ammonia from Ceará in Brazil can get to Europe at $880. From Saudi Arabia, this region is close to there, but we can compete. So as far away from Latin America, we can compete supplying hydrogen to this part of the world. But the margins are tight, so we need to produce very competitive hydrogen. And one key to have competitive hydrogen is low-cost renewables, but also the quality of the hydrogen. And what do I mean by quality? And this is one of the areas where we're working at the IDB, producing a certification system that shows our hydrogen is truly clean, that it has been produced sustainably, using properly water resources, which is critical to produce hydrogen. And in the context of COP, many countries announced that they are joining the clean hydrogen certification scheme for Latin America, and we hope more Caribbean countries also join. Because we're not going to compete only on price, but also on quality and sustainability of the fuel. Now, going to other concrete examples, we have supported 5 of the hydrogen strategies that have been released in Latin America. We're already providing financing for hydrogen production, and this is the case of Chile, $400 million in investment for clean hydrogen production in Chile. And now, how about the Caribbean? We see important advantages in certain parts of the Caribbean, and we're working with Trinidad and Tobago, as Devon mentioned, on finding out the possibilities of producing hydrogen, not only for export, but for internal use. And some people would say, why Trinidad? Trinidad is one of the main exporters of ammonia right now. So Trinidad, they understand the ammonia trading market so well because they have been a traditional exporter of fossil fuels. So the idea is, how do we help Trinidad engage and take the advantage of this energy transition? So we're working with the government of Trinidad and Tobago to prepare and finance the first hydrogen production facility with solar. so that the hydrogen is used internally in the country, and then in the future, yes, why not for exports? Trinidad already uses hydrogen in many of its internal process. The cement industry already uses hydrogen. So there is this internal capability already in the country that you could take on to take advantage of this new opportunity. So definitely in the Caribbean, we're focusing on this sweet spots where hydrogen could become a new opportunity. And this is why we're looking at Trinidad to start with. Other opportunities may come. So that's where we are working on hydrogen in the region in Central America. And then also looking into how the Caribbean could serve as a fueling station for the shipping industry. The shipping is very important. The shipping industry in the world needs to decarbonize. There are global commitments on how the shipping industry needs to decarbonize. So some ships may not be able to arrive to a port if that port does not provide clean fuel. So this is critical that the Caribbean prepares for the future of clean shipping. And we're working with the Caribbean Shipping Association to understand, what are those opportunities in the Caribbean to be able to be a platform for clean fuel shipping for the shipping industry that is so important in the Caribbean. So I'll leave it at that, Shirley, in this part of my intervention. Thank you.
Great. So those are some exciting developments and some real examples of how hydrogen and decarbonization specifically is going to be deployed in the region. But we've made the point that there is still a role for adaptation and for really reinforcing resilience in the building of all these plans. Emma Robinson from the United Kingdom's Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office is with us. Emma, I'm going to ask you to once again share what your office specifically is doing in the Caribbean, what its role is, how you're collaborating with other partners to support adaptation and resilience within the region.
Sure. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Cheryl. Thank you for having me. So really, I'll take a step back and say, what we mean by adaptation and resilience when we're looking at energy services. So really, and I was pleased to hear, Devon speak about this. When we're investing and thinking about investment plans for renewable energy and low carbon energy, there's no point doing that if we're not also thinking about how to make the system much more resilient, because we know that climate shocks can have a huge impact on energy systems all the way throughout this sort of transmission and distribution network. And also we know that extreme heat impacts mean that we need access to, we can't have intermittent energy access. We need to have cheaper and more sustainable access to energy. So when we're thinking about adaptation and resilience in FCDO, I think broadly we're thinking we know we're not doing enough. And we need to think about, we've done a lot of work on when we're thinking about using our public finance, and there's a clear commitment there that rich nations have to provide this public finance and meet the 100 billion goal. We have to keep doing that. And we have that responsibility to deliver that. But when we're delivering that public finance, we need to think actually how are we using that public finance to support our partners in the most catalytic way. And I think that's where we're not doing enough on adaptation and resilience. With the mitigation challenge, we've had some successes in being able to bring on private investment as well through using public finance to de-risk that. But in the adaptation space, this is much more nascent. So in our work in the Caribbean, we're really seeing that, well, the Caribbean, as you know, has a very acute risk due to climate change. But when our work there, we're thinking, how can we make our contribution much more catalytic, and how does that involve working with other partners such as IDB and others in the region? So I can give a few examples. So the UK SIP program that was mentioned, the purpose of that was to be able to provide some concessional finance to allow IDB to support some upstream technical assistance work to help improve the enabling environment and improve market development for low carbon investment, as well as provide some concessional capital funding to be able to get those investments off the ground and allow IDB Invest to bring in private sector investment. that was solely really focused in the mitigation space and in Latin America. And now I'm so pleased that your IDB president and our minister was signed this letter of intent a couple of days ago, which means that actually we can pivot this program more into the adaptation and resilience space and pivot it into the Caribbean as well. So, and we know that the impact of these investments can be really transformational when we're thinking about how we can build not only low carbon infrastructure, but low carbon resilient infrastructure. So that's what we're hoping to use the UK Sustainable Infrastructure Programme with IDB Invest to do. And then more broadly, I think what we're trying to do is think about how we can better support country platforms for resilience. So a good example is the work we've been doing in Jamaica. So it started with some upstream work, and it might sound very boring like data work, but actually we think this is really impactful because we know that everywhere when we think about resilience and climate impacts and the impacts of climate risk, we need better data. We just don't have that data to say, let's think about all of the different scenarios, and when you compound all those scenarios, actually what are the predicted damages we're going to endure, and how do we ex ante make those adjustments to our infrastructure and our systems to avoid those damages happening. So we supported this, let me remember the name, systemic risk assessment tool to basically look across Jamaica and map across the water, the infrastructure, the energy sector, and then kind of compound all of those risks and say, actually, what are the real hotspots for climate resilience, and how could we target projects that address specifically those hotspots. So that is a tool that was developed by Oxford University, and we think it has real replication, could be replicated across the Caribbean. So that's something that we'd really like to kind of work on in the future. But that tool can then basically form the basis of, it can be integrated into the planning ministries and specific water or energy agencies, so that when a new project comes across the desk, you can kind of scrutinize and investigate, okay, well, actually, would we be less exposed to climate risk if we made these small adjustments here that might not cost that much up front, but actually could save a lot down the line? So that's the type of thing that we've been doing. And that, with that, we've now, well, there's so much going on in Jamaica in this space. So I think what's really happening is there is a bit of a country platform where IDB are doing a lot of work as well on supporting the government on a project preparation facility. So we're hoping that the work that we've supported on better understanding the climate vulnerabilities can help identify the really transformational projects that could then be supported through IDB's project preparation facility. Then we've seen that Jamaica, like Barbados, is going to establish a blue-green financing facility through the GCF. So that means they only have to go to the GCF once. Minister Clark, I saw a panel, Minister Clark from Jamaica was discussing this. They only have to go to the GCF once, basically, to agree that fund. And then they can then put some de-risking equity into that fund. And then development partners can also contribute to that. So it's a kind of one-stop shop for supporting all of these climate and resilience projects. And so I think what we're seeing is there's so much going on, but partners need to coordinate in a much better way to make sure that we're not leaving any gaps, but also that we're, I think FCDO's role is to try and fill in the gaps. Do you know what I mean? Where the, IDB are the ones with all the expertise and GCF, and of course the government will plan exactly what they want, and then FCDO can come in and say, okay, where we have some grant support money, where can we help plug those missing gaps? And so that's why I think the country platform approach is really important, and we've seen that with on the mitigation side, and I'm really hoping now that we will see more country platforms led by governments for their resilience work as well. So yes, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. So we've spoken to the role that these development partners are playing in accelerating decarbonization and building resilience. Specifically, I'd like to hear, starting with IDB and then SICRI, what each of your organizations is doing to help develop the policy framework to support this transition. We would have mentioned that it is necessary to bring private sector and specific industries such as shipping, you mentioned, to the table to help with this decarbonization. How are you, from the policy perspective, supporting and enabling this transition going forward?
Very important question, Cheryl. I would like to take this opportunity to actually put the case of the UKCIP at the right way of collaboration to basically tackle the barriers of clean development in the Caribbean, for example. So first of all, you need the regulatory environment. You need the rules so that investors can come and invest in clean energy. For example, competitive procurement of renewables, then access to the grid, and all that requires regulatory work. This is what we did through UKCIP. So UKCIP provided the resources so that we, as the IDB, with our partners, prepare all the upfront regulatory work to develop the way in which the private sector will engage. And then together with that, UKCIP also provided the financing. So once the private projects were ready, they received financing through our private sector window. This is what we want to do now in the Caribbean with FCDO. And thank you, Emma, for being here. And we are doing that in the Caribbean, but we need to scale that. So it's very good news that other partners are coming to the table, like the UK now, to work in the Caribbean. Concrete examples on how we have worked with the Caribbean to develop the regulatory framework. Barbados, as you know, distributed generation, it requires rules, it requires regulations for the feed-in tariff for distributed generation. We supported the regulator to develop those rules. We are supporting Barbados right now on developing the regulatory framework for storage in different forms, because storage is needed in small islands to manage the variability of resources. We're helping in Jamaica with competitive procurement of big, utility scale wind and solar. We're supporting also the Bahamas, developing the business models for off-grid, mini grid solutions. But we need to scale up. And this is why more partnerships are required in the Caribbean. And as I said, the example of UKC, this new phase that was announced at COP, I think is a very good example. And this is why we collaborate with the Caribbean Development Bank, for example, because for us, to more quickly access different countries, we need partners in the region. One of those is the Caribbean Development Bank, where we have a structured geothermal development program for all the islands in the Caribbean. And also CICRI, because centers like CICRI are critical to bring the knowledge of the region. They are critical to, help countries develop their investment plans and to spread knowledge more quickly. So in the Caribbean, we need this type of collaboration if we want to scale up, definitely. So I just give you some examples of how we are doing it in the Caribbean, thanks to basically what you see here. No?
Thanks again. And before I jump into the crux of what you asked, just wanted to point out that a critical part of what we do is really focused around coordination and collaborations. In fact, one of the main reasons for the establishment of the center was to coordinate the multiplicity of actors. The understanding is that no single actor can do everything. And as my colleague from the FCDO says, it's really about identifying the jigsaw puzzle and everybody fitting in pieces, hopefully getting the entire puzzle right. How the CICRI has been working, therefore, is to firstly work very closely with the countries, because the countries are the primary organs. It's who we serve. It's the reason why we are here. There is no region without the country. And so we work at an advisement level with the governments, where we try to understand what the governments are trying to achieve. We look into policies to see if the policies are fit for purpose and provide the basis through which the governments can achieve what it is that they are seeking to achieve. We are, as I mentioned, providing support at the level of planning. In the planning, we do integrated resource and resilience plans. So we do actually use a methodology that is pretty similar to what you are speaking about, where we are actually looking at looking into the resilience of systems and developing what we call a least regrets pathway with an investment pipeline that allows countries to make determinations and decisions, knowing the full risk of any climate projected impacts that a project or the assets that are necessary for the energy system to function may face. So a country may say, okay, this is a solar site, but there is a risk it could flood within the next 10 years. Do we still go ahead and designate it as a solar site, but with the understanding that developers should put in place safeguards against the flooding when they are building, or do we simply not utilize the site and do solar projects elsewhere? So these are some of the things that are done. And so in some of those nuances, what we're able to do from the planning system is to provide to the governments very clear recommendations on how policies and regulations should change to allow the plans to function. Because if a country has gone through the cycle, which is an inclusive cycle of planning, with a multiplicity of stakeholders, including governments, private sectors, NGOs, civil society actors, to develop what is a common plan that all have subscribed to. The plan requires that certain things must happen in terms of projects and developments in the sector. Then what we would do is to sit with the government and to help them to understand that for these actions to occur, as was mentioned earlier, the framework that is necessary for those actions has to be put in place. And so we help them to identify what specific items may be missing from the existing framework that could inhibit the actual pipeline of projects or the plans that would have been established from happening in the way it is expected to. And so there are clear recommendations that come out of the planning process in terms of how do you update and modernize your policy, how do you update and modernize your regulations to suit, because simply planning without there being the regulatory matching to the plans is something that we found is important to address, because oftentimes regulations are being treated in a vacuum and plans have been treated in a vacuum. And what we try to do is ensure that they are always synchronized, the regulations, the plans, the policies, so you don't have these mismatches between regulations, plans, and policies. In fact, we are working, a specific example, we are working with St. Kitts and Nevis very closely, and we operate throughout the entire value chain, where we are looking into we recently did an integrated resource and resilience plan for St. Kitts and Nevis. And after doing that integrated resource and resilience plan, we are using that integrated resource and resilience plan to now develop an integrated energy plan, which is now a full energy sector plan, moving from an electricity sector plan. And then that is feeding into a broader national development plan that is now leading into what we call a flagship project that we are also supporting in terms of development around geothermal development as well as hydrogen development, that is linked to the plan. We are also now supporting within that context the understanding of what the regulatory framework should look like for that project and the plans to be realized. We are helping to utilize that IRRP to improve or enhance the NDCs as they go through the NDC revision cycle. The view is that you try to seek as far as possible to align the different pieces, align the national energy policy, which we are also reviewing from the IRRP. So you align the national energy policy, align the regulatory framework, align the NDCs, all with the different plans, so that there are no gaps, there are no loopholes, and you continually update and each time you update one set of plans in a cycle or one set of regulations, you always seek to go through the entire cycle of alignment for everything else throughout that process. So policy is influencing planning, planning is influencing regulations, regulations is influencing projects, and then the cycle continues. Projects are influencing regulations, and regulations influencing planning and planning influencing policies. So it's really what we refer to as a self-consistency model, where you continuously improve and you continuously develop. And that's the approach that we have taken, and we are doing that in St. Kitts and Nevis. We have also done similarly in some other countries, but I'll stop here for now. Thanks.
Thank you. So we'll pose a question to the CDB as well, who's just joined us. We are speaking to the issue of regulation and how the multinational development banks and development partners are supporting regulation for the energy transition in the region. We've established that it is an important enabling factor in bringing the private sector and key industry players to the table. We'd love to hear from you on what the CDB specifically is doing in that region to support the regional partners and to support the incentivizing of the private sector in participating in the transition.
Thank you so much, moderator. And let me apologize for my tardiness. I had a crisis, just put it that way. So thank you so much. So I know the time is short. I would say, in a nutshell, this is a critical area. As a matter of fact, we have maintained that this remains one of the single biggest challenge areas that need to be addressed. What we're doing, we think the landscape is quite complex for countries in terms of what is the right, what's the right mix of regulation, the approach that's appropriate for their context. There's uncertainty about that. It requires technical expertise. And so because of those uncertainties and this perception, many times, of the complexity, nothing happens as well. You don't get the actions in a timely way. So we have come up with this idea of a minimum regulatory function, which is really saying, trying to answer the question, what are the critical ingredients? If you don't know where to start, what are the few things that you think you need to at least have in place first, or as a start to give some confidence to investors, private investors? And so we have done a publication, and we're going to be using that as a tool to help to identify gaps and help to move the countries along with partners, because as recognized, the IDB, the World Bank, and CCRI, it has to be a multi-partner approach because of the nature of the beast, right? And so we think that this is one area that we can help to have a practical, almost a tool to help to move things along. But certainly, it remains one of the most important areas we consider in terms of impacting the whole issue of scaling up investment, especially as it relates to private sector investment, which has to be a big driver for this section. Thanks.
So before we turn to our audience for questions, I'm just going to ask each of you in turn to tell us from your perspective, having embarked on this journey of collaboration, coordination, and supporting the member countries of the region, if there was one or two critical success factors that you can point to that will help us make the next steps more effectively, what would they be? Who else needs to be at the table? What other resources or information or partners do we need to leverage? We'll perhaps start with you, Mr. Madrigal.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more that in the Caribbean, one critical factor to continue advancing with the transition is regulation. And regulation is to be adapted to very specific country, but we need to find collaboratively what are those sweet spots where we can quickly advance. There are certain models on how to bring private investment that have been very successful, but I think we need to combine more strategically the resources of each of us here on the table. And I think, the example I said with the UK is one critical. The UK bringing the resources, we bring in the closeness to our clients, and then the financial resources to deploy the project. So I think the critical factor will be to continue identifying what is the sweet spot for each of us participating in the Caribbean. And I think we're finding in it more and more what is our contribution of each of the partners and of the Caribbean.
Thank you. So I would say for us, what we're really trying to think about is maybe we might be supporting specific investments in one country, but actually, how do we work in a way that promotes a more regional approach? So how do we work more with CDB, CCRE, with the 5Cs? Because they will have the capacity to transfer that knowledge more broadly into other countries. Because yes, maybe Barbados and Jamaica are maybe more ahead in thinking about their systems for resilience, so they've received this kind of support from the GCF. But how do we take that and quickly replicate, and what can FCDO do to enhance that through regional partners, I think. So I think that's, for me, the key thing is trying to think about everything that we're supporting and think, well, the regional partners are really key to actually expanding this, and then thinking about the different reasons why it may not work in certain places, the more political context, etc., to make sure that that's factored in.
Yeah, so so two things. First is continuity. And I use the term continuity, and I don't intend to outdo Joseph today in terms of talking too long, but I will give a quick context. It's no accident that the country within CARICOM, that the two countries that have independent countries in the Caribbean that have been able to get to production stage in geothermal in terms of wells are the two which has had governments lasting over 20 years. That is Dominica and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, albeit St. Vincent had some different issues, but it wasn't that they didn't do it, it's just that the resource wasn't there. But Dominica and St. Vincent are the two that have gone the furthest. Well, I mean, in terms of the furthest. Dominica and St. Vincent have gone the furthest in terms of having drilled production wells for geothermal, and both have governments which have lasted over 20 years. We're not saying that countries should have governments that last 20 years, but putting in the institutional framework is something that would allow you to have that kind of continuity. We have seen Jamaica do that, and they have done so successfully. And Barbados is now getting to that stage where the continuity, if it's indifferent from who is in power, helps. I mean, in some countries, fortuitously, it has been the same government in power, and that helped them. But in countries that have put in institutional frameworks to support that continuity, we have seen it work, as in Jamaica and nowadays in Barbados. So that continuity, for me, is the bottom line, and you really should never lose sight of that. And when I used to teach in the university, I used to call it to my students, I used to use a term I call stick-to-itiveness. And that's the first point. The second piece, in terms of the major ingredient, which I think is necessary, is that regional, if you want to call it a multi-country cooperation, collaboration. There have been so many areas, and we see it even recently with the pandemic, that allows those countries who are able to move quickly to do some things quickly, and those countries who are not able to move as quickly to learn from those who would have moved quickly and to benefit from and be supported by. And the European Union is a perfect example of that. And we see it also as something in the Caribbean. It happens in the United States within the different states, where there are different states, different countries learning from each other, and it works well in an instance where there is a robust regional mechanism that frames all of that happening. And I do believe that we must always recognize that the importance of a regional approach that facilitates cooperation, collaboration, and sharing and exchange of information and experiences, and of implementation too, is important. Thanks.
I agree with all that is said. So just put one dimension to it. That's really a small component. We do a good talk as an institution in terms of cooperation. I think we have to do a little bit more in terms of how we implement that. And I think structured approach to that is very important. And we have improved. I think certainly in terms of geothermal in the Caribbean, there's greater collaboration now among the partners, right? CDB, IDB, and so on. But I think we really have to structure that, because in that way we are better able to help the countries in a way that is more efficient and more optimal. So that's the part I want to put in this collaboration. Let us structure it so that it's not by the way, and it's only when we talk in fora like these that it comes up, but we have a systematic way of ensuring that we follow through on the good ideas that we have set ourselves. So, but I think we have made progress. Having said all of that, I think we have come a long way, say, compared to 5 years ago. So I want to commend the institution, but we have to find a way to make it work better. Thanks.
Do we have any questions from our audience? Yes, we do. Mike?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for your time and your insights on this
Sorry.
panel here today.
Can I ask you to introduce yourself
I
and your
will.
organization, and then pose your question in a succinct
I will.
context? Thank you.
Thank you for your time. My name is Dr. Charlene Smith. I'm a nuclear engineer based in Washington, D.C. And essentially, we all know that the Caribbean region contributes the least, or are amongst the least contributors to global carbon emissions. And so I think knowing that it's important for us to prioritize projects that not only align with our net zero commitments, but also promote socioeconomic advancement. So my question is, what is the banks, whether regional or international, the Development Office and SICRI doing to support specific projects that do exactly that? So I can talk about the specific case of Jamaica, who has expressed interest in including nuclear energy as a part of the energy mix in the region. What can you all do together to help to support Jamaica in that endeavor?
I can take the first bite, Joseph, since you don't have the mic. The way in which we work with countries is really to support SICRI's drive is implementation. Despite all else that it does, the major focus is about implementation. And implementation. To achieve than others. Like I said, Kitts and Nevis, as I mentioned earlier, we work with St. Kitts and Nevis to develop one or two large transformative flagships, and that could change the entire country, and numbers of countries in that sub-region could benefit from that. So we have been using exactly that approach, where we are not focused on the decarbonization as our first point of interest. Decarbonization for us is a byproduct for us in the Caribbean. The first principle is that the projects that we are doing should remit to us a resilient and secure energy system. And fortunately for us, and fortuitously for the rest of the world, the technologies are such that it's the technologies that support decarbonization that will allow us to be able to do what we are doing in the way that we want to do. In case of Jamaica and nuclear, SMR, as we know, is on the table. It's big. We don't have nuclear experts in SICRI, but hopefully one of these days we'll be able to incorporate nuclear experts and be able to provide targeted support. But What how we support countries like Jamaica in terms of that aspects of it is to really help with the intelligence, the sector intelligence through modeling and engineering modeling that could help to look at scenarios that would include these options such as nuclear against all the other options on the table to help the decision makers to understand how the whole system will fit and work together. Thanks.
Maybe you should still. Thanks. It's all has to do with my targets, but thanks. So we are guided by the policy and strategy, which is usually arrived at based on broad consultation with the country. So what we have as a policy and strategy fits within our broader strategic framework, but also is guided by the countries. We do not have nuclear as one of the areas of focus at the moment. Having said that, whichever BMC is pursuing whatever strategy, we seek to provide support in terms of technical guidance and support. Now, the nuclear question is still an unsettled one in our minds in the context of a small island state. I understand SMRs and so on. You know, we follow the issues, we follow, we track and trend all the issues. But even in the broader climate decarbonization strategy globally, where it fits is still a debate. And there are issues and risks in the context of small island states. So it is not one of the main areas of focus and support, our priorities, should I use your word, in terms of our strategy. But to the extent that one of our members want to pursue that, the question then becomes, how do we provide any support to manage what could be risk or to better deliver such solution? So it's not a priority area for us at the moment. Thanks.
Just maybe wanted to add, you know, what is the main challenge of the sector in the Caribbean, the energy sector? It's dependence on fossil fuels and the impacts we see already of climate change. And time is of an essence. So I really think, you know, and given the scale of the countries, we should think on those solutions that you can implement quickly. And it has been proven that you can quickly speed up with existing well-proven technologies that require, you know, capacity that you have already in the countries. You know, you can deploy solar and wind so quickly to reduce consumption of fossil fuels that you will be surprised. We have countries in Latin America that have gone from, you know, 40-60% fossil fuels to 80% renewables in a question of 4 or 5 years. You can do that very quickly with renewables. You know, nuclear takes a lot of time, of effort, and a different institutional setup. So we need to think very carefully where nuclear is a solution. Time, cost is critical on different resources. And we mentioned renewables, but also in the Caribbean, one of the quick wins, as we're doing in Jamaica, is energy efficiency, and you can advance much more quickly with other solutions. So I think we need to understand which technologies can be used more quickly and more effectively in different places, and different technologies require different, you know, capacities. So I think, as our colleagues Devon from SICRI said, it needs to be carefully planned. It needs to be carefully planned.
Thank you. So I'll just ask, quick, yeah. So let's make the question really quick. We are at time, and following this audience question, I will ask you, Emma. Go ahead.
So the question is actually for Emma.
Okay, great.
Keisha Farnham, Caribbean Climate Smart Accelerator. Emma, so the sort of checklist that you mentioned that projects could measure themselves against to see whether they're basically filling the gaps and ticking all the boxes before implementation. How much did it cost to get it done, and how long did that cost to get that tool up and running? And we'll chat sidebar about how we could possibly scale something like that.
Do you mean the tool I mentioned? Yeah. So this tool, so it's very similar to Sea Coral, I think, which you may be familiar with. But I think it's there's maybe it's looking more at the kind of layering of the different risks on top of each other and superimposing them to basically look at, what are the real hotspots. It has been done not only in Jamaica, but in other sectors in different countries. But Jamaica is the first example where they actually were able to take all energy, water, and transport sectors and layer that on top of each other. I think to develop it took maybe around 1 year, something like that. But then, of course, I think the challenge is when we create these tools, and I think the data tools are so important, and where there is a huge gap. When we create these tools, it's only worthwhile if actually they're used and they can then be enhanced. So what we've done with this project is to transfer the tool into UE, and UE will take the tool, they will enhance it, they will validate it, they will embellish it to basically fit their needs. So that's kind of the idea behind the tool, that it will then become country specific, but UE also, with having a regional presence, will be able to work and trying to help create this. We're now thinking about, if we're going to create this tool regionally, what are the first steps in doing so? So really keen to have discussions on that. That would be excellent. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our panelists this morning and to our audience. The key takeaways from our session are about continued collaboration, more strategic collaboration, strengthening the coordinating mechanisms among our agencies and development partners so that we enable and accelerate the energy transition in the region, decarbonizing, building resilience, supporting adaptation as well as we achieve our climate ambitions across the Caribbean. We've also pointed to supporting the specific needs of our member countries. While we are a region that appears on the surface to be homogeneous, certainly there are significant differences at the level of each of our countries, which requires our agencies to provide very specific and unique support. I think each of our partners here this morning have spoken to how they do that and how they enable the transition. And we look forward to achieving our ambitions and certainly staying on the forefront of decarbonization across the Caribbean region. Division Chief, Mr. Madrigal, I'll now ask you to provide the closing comments.
No, thank you, Sherry. I think you did an excellent job summarizing the session because I know everybody's busy and attending different COPs. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for attending. Those people following online, Devon, Joseph, Emma, thanks for coming. And Shirley, thank you so much for moderating. Thank you very much. Thank you.